Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First and foremost, we are sorry to start a bit late, about 7 minutes late because of some technical issues. Assalamualaikum and good morning, good evening to all who are with us physically and also online. Thank you for all your presence and special thanks to Huwaida joining us from USA. She is now 12 hours behind us in Malaysia. So before we begin, I would like to make a quick introduction of Asia Pacific Women Coalition for Al-Quds and Palestine and our series of lectures on Palestine. We call it ApWCQP, who is a regional body under the Global Movement Coalition for Al-Quds and Palestine, which serve as a unifying platform for women as individuals, associations, foundations across countries in Asia Pacific region who are committed to the cause of Al-Quds and Palestine. At the moment, we have 4 countries on our coalition: Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and Maldives, and we hope more countries to join, inshallah. This lecture program we started about 1 month ago as a means to unpack many issues relating to Palestine so that the momentum does not die with the so-called ceasefire in Gaza. We know that the genocide is ongoing and we should increase our work to help liberate Palestine and inshallah. Alhamdulillah, we have Huwaida Arraf with us today. She is a Palestinian American activist and a lawyer who co-founded the International Solidarity Movement, ISM, which is a Palestinian-led organization using non-violent protests and international pressure to support the Palestinian. ISM reminds me of Rachel Corrie, who was killed in 2003 while protesting the demolitions in Rafah in Gaza Strip. And she was crushed by the Israeli armored bulldozer. And she was only 23 years old. Welcome, Huwaida, and thank you so much for making time to be with us today. Huwaida, it's so great to see you today, even though it's online. Can you hear me? Huwaida, can you hear me? No. Can you hear me, Huwaida? She can't hear me, I think. Can you hear me? She is muted. Can you hear me?
Background.
I can't hear you. Can you try that again? Can you hear me? Can you
hear
say
me?
something?
Can you hear me now?
Can you
Hello?
say something because we can't hear you?
I am speaking. You can't hear me?
Now okay. So okay. Welcome, Huwaida, and thank you so much for making time to be with us. It's great.
Oh, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with you.
And the last time we saw you together, we were together in October 2025 on the Constitution to break the siege of Gaza. I do hope you, Adam, and the children are well. So
yes,
today,
thank you.
We would like to know about you more in detail. Maybe you could start by introducing yourself, your background, your family, and your involvement in Palestinian cause, for example, in the ISN and also FFC. And congratulations for FFC for the 2026 War Abolition Movement Award recipient. Thank you. Okay, please.
Thank you. Yes, let me try to keep this part brief. So, I am a Palestinian living in the United States. I'm Palestinian American. My parents came here when my mother was almost 9 months pregnant with me, and I'm the oldest of 5 children because they wanted to raise their new family in a place where they wouldn't be living under military occupation or even treated as unwanted citizens, because my father is from a village, it's a Palestinian village that falls inside 48, what is now called Israel. And so technically, we're citizens, but we are discriminated against. We are not afforded equal rights because we are not Jewish. My father's village is actually a small Christian village in the Galilee. And my mother is from the West Bank town of Beit Sahur, which is near Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank. So I was born and raised in the United States. And, as I was growing up, my parents didn't speak much about politics. We did used to go to Palestine for some summers, but then my parents stopped going because of the political upheaval. Uh, but when I was old enough to go by myself, I did. And then I decided to study politics in university. I thought I would go into diplomacy. And when I graduated from university, I decided to move to Jerusalem. Uh, at the time, it was, still the Oslo peace process. And I thought I could contribute to that. And it was to work with an organization that worked with both Palestinian and Israeli youth. But I quickly realized what a problem these organizations were. Not because it's a problem to work and to dialogue, to work together. That's never a problem. But when these organizations that pretend to create like this false equality, and they don't want to focus on the politics. They just want to focus on normalizing the situation. You are normalizing then occupation and oppression. And I saw how that played out on the ground. Whereas I wanted our students to see how Israel was demolishing Palestinian homes, that was considered too political, right? And when kids would disagree about history, because Israelis have their own kind of invented history where they're entitled to this land and don't acknowledge that it was taken over by force from Palestinians. We were told to just let them agree to disagree. You can't, that's not a starting point, right? And so I left this program and I co-founded the International Solidarity Movement, which was a movement designed to really globalize the Intifada, to have people from around the world try to come to the occupied Palestinian territory and see with their own eyes what was happening, to stand with Palestinians who were every day using various forms of nonviolent resistance to hold on to their land and their livelihood, and were being abused, arrested, killed by Israeli soldiers and settlers. We thought the international solidarity movement could provide a base of support for Palestinian popular resistance, could be a resource, could go back and tell the stories of what they've seen, and to give Palestinians a sense of hope that they're not abandoned, which certainly it seems so if you look at the fact that what our global community of states have done, and all of the years that they have provided Israel with, either like the United States, unconditional support, or have not taken more proactive actions to punish Israel for its violations of Palestinian rights. So the International Solidarity Movement has been around since around 2001, and it still exists today with incredible volunteers standing with Palestinians. Today, they are facing horrific abuses by Israeli settlers. If you're following the news, they are attacking Palestinian communities every day. We cannot get ISM, International Solidarity Movement, volunteers into Gaza. We used to be able to. That ended in 2003 when Israel killed one of our volunteers, Rachel Corrie. The military ran her over with a military bulldozer as she was trying to prevent the demolition of a Palestinian home. And a few weeks after they killed Rachel, they killed another one of our volunteers, Tom Herndal. They shot him in the back of the head when he was trying to move Palestinian children out of the line of Israeli fire. And a couple months after that, they shot another not this time, not an ISM volunteer, but a British journalist. And so they were getting a little bit of criticism for killing internationals. They usually don't get criticized for killing Palestinians, but instead of any kind of accountability for these deliberate murders of these foreign civilians, what Israel decided to do was just prevent the international solidarity movement, to prevent internationals from getting into Gaza. So it became much harder after 2003 to access Gaza until 2008, when we launched the first boats to try to break Israel's siege on Gaza in 2008. This was with a group that was the predecessor of what is now the Freedom Flotilla coalition. We were called the Free Gaza Movement, and we decided to take these two sailboats and try to make it to Gaza in defiance of Israel's naval blockade. Uh, I won't belabor that, but to everyone's surprise, we actually did make it into Gaza, and we ended up leaving a number of civilians there to restart the international solidarity movement and to be there with Palestinians. But that is, I said I would make it short. That's a little long version of my story. I did, in that time, also become a lawyer focused on international human rights and humanitarian law. And since then, I've been trying to um, do both. I think we need both. We need more than both. We need the law, but we know the law oftentimes is not enough and does not work without civil society pressure that creates the environment by which, there is political will to push the law in the direction that it needs to be. So I'm currently, an activist and a lawyer struggling for Palestinian rights, but really the rights of everyone who is abused and not free.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe now, as I understood, you have an Israeli passport, right? Yes.
Correct.
And we, the international participants on the FFC boards, were treated differently from you as an Israeli citizen. And you have been in and out of the Israeli prison and detention centers many, many times. So we would like to deep dive on your experience as a detainee, challenging the IOF directly on the field and in the prison. And also maybe we can ask you why actually the Palestinian in Israeli prison should be called hostages rather than prisoners. Is it the narrative that they want to portray subtly that it is legitimate to kidnap the Palestinian and do whatever they want while they are in prison? Please, your comment.
Yes. Okay. So two very good, very different questions. I will try to take them separately. So you're right. I do have Israeli citizenship, and it's interesting how that works because, as I mentioned, I was born in the United States, but Israel has this law where citizens, like my father is a citizen, they can pass their citizenship on to their children just for one generation if they're born outside of Israel. Now, that is a law that seems to be neutral on its face. It applies to all Israeli citizens. But in fact, this is one of many, many laws that discriminates against Palestinians only. Why? Because Jews all over the world can claim automatic citizenship to Israel. Israel recruits Jews from around the world to come and take citizenship and live in place of Palestinians. And so that law effectively only applies to Palestinian citizens of Israel. So my father passed his citizenship along to me, even though I was born in the United States. But if I wanted to give my citizenship to my kids, which I did, not because I really want Israeli citizenship, but because I wanted to make sure that my kids would not be banned from entering the homeland of their forefathers, of their grandparents, their ancestors, to learn about their culture, religion, where they come from. And Israel certainly would do that. They have banned countless Palestinians. They actually banned my husband for almost 2 decades from being able to access Palestine. And so I was adamant that they needed to have that citizenship so Israel would not ban them. But I couldn't pass it along to them unless I gave birth to them in Israel. And so I made that decision, even though I knew my husband would not be able to come with me because he was banned by Israel. We tried. He did come with me, but Israel arrested him at the airport. They imprisoned him and then they deported him. And I stayed alone and gave birth to our son, and then did the same a year and a half later with our daughter. So now my kids have dual citizenship and they can get into the country. Hopefully one day this will not be an issue and Palestinians all over the world can come home. But as you noted, so I do have Israeli citizenship. Now, there are so many different levels to rights in Israel. Those who have the highest rights are Jewish Israelis. And then even there are levels there because Israel discriminates internally between what they call the Ashkenazi, the Eastern European Jews, or the Sephardic Jews that come from Arab countries. And then they have the Palestinian citizens of Israel. We are citizens. We have some civil rights, but we are not equal. For example, we are not entitled to nationhood. That this is a right exclusively to Jews only. There are now, last time I checked, about 100 laws on the books in Israeli laws that discriminate against Palestinian citizens of Israel. The one I mentioned about passing the citizenship, that's one of many. There are others that prohibit teaching our own history, that prohibit Palestinians from living in certain places, that prohibit Palestinians from going back to the land that they were kicked out of. There are Palestinian towns and villages that Israel considers that provides no services to, no running water, no sewage, no municipal services to. And again, over 100. There's a Palestinian organization that actually provides us, the flotilla, with legal services when Israel has captured us. It's called Adala. It's actually an organization that fights for Arab minority rights inside Israel, and they have a database. So if you go onto their website, you can access the database that lists out all of the different laws and how they discriminate against Palestinians. But to your question, so why am I treated differently? Because I'm a citizen, I can't be deported. And when we go on the flotilla and Israel hijacks the flotilla and kidnaps all of us, it takes us against our will to Israel. What it does is it treats the internationals, all the foreigners, as people who try to illegally enter Israel. And so it treats them under their immigration law, and it says you tried to illegally enter Israel, and so we are going to deport you. Even though we tell them, you kidnapped us, we didn't want to come here. Of course, they don't listen, they do what they want, but that is the legal basis. They then deport the internationals as having illegally entered Israel. With me, they can't deport me. I'm a citizen. So they have two options. They can either let me go or they can prosecute me. And each time I've said, go ahead, prosecute me. I know I did nothing wrong. I'm actually I'm fighting for international law. And each time they've opted not to prosecute me. I think they know that their position is weak. So all of the times that I've been on the flotillas, maybe some 10 times now, and the times that I've been arrested, actually, even in the West Bank protesting and in Jerusalem, I have not yet been prosecuted. Maybe one day that will change. But to your moving slightly into your next question about, even though I'm Palestinian, I have Israeli citizenship, and so I am treated under Israel's civil law. Palestinians from the West Bank and from Gaza, they are treated under Israel's military law, which affords them very, very little rights. There's a whole host of laws. One of them is the military court system under which Palestinians are prosecuted. And this court system has repeatedly been said by various human rights organizations, it fails to meet the minimum of due process. You have a system where the prosecutor, the witnesses, the people doing the arrest, and the judge, all of them are part of the Israeli occupation forces. So they are all part of the very forces that is militarily occupying you. And so this military court system has a conviction rate of about 100%. And so what happens is that Palestinians who are detained, if they are accused and brought to trial, and many are not, I'll explain that in a minute, many will take a plea bargain because they know they will be convicted. There's a very little, the threshold evidence is very low. Again, the prosecutor, the witnesses, and the judge are all Israeli military. 100% chance they'll be convicted. So sometimes they'll take a plea bargain. Those that are serving actually sentences have likely taken a plea bargain. But so many Palestinians, prisoners who are languishing now in Israelis' dungeons and torture chambers, have not been prosecuted, have not even had a chance to see the charges against them. So before I go into the hostages and prisoners thing, I want to kind of set out the framing, because it's often assumed that hostage taking is something that like militias or terrorist groups do and not states. And this is actually not true. Quite frankly, this is backwards. Article 34 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and the Fourth Geneva Convention is lays out most of the law of armed conflict, and it also governs it's the law of occupation, and it prohibits. So Article 34 prohibits hostage taking, right? And the convention again specifically governs the conduct of occupying powers, Israel, and any state party to a conflict. It was drafted, this article specifically was drafted in direct response to Nazi Germany's practice of seizing civilians, of taking civilian hostages during its World War II occupations. So that article of the Fourth Geneva Convention that prohibits hostage taking was specifically drafted to deal with a state in taking civilian hostages. And the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court lists hostage taking as a grave breach of the Geneva Convention. So it applies to all states that are party to the Geneva Conventions, which are all states of the United Nations. So it's not just, these armed militias or, terrorist groups that take hostages, but states can too, and it's strictly prohibited. Now, when we talk about prisoners, and Israel, of course, says that these Palestinians are prisoners, but the word prisoner, it implies that there's a legal process. There's an arrest based on evidence. There's a charge, a trial, a conviction. And so it calls Palestinians prisoners, and oftentimes accusing them of security, terrorism, all of these things. But again, the facts show otherwise. So right now, according to Palestinian organizations, there are 9,600 Palestinians languishing in Israeli dungeons and torture chambers. Of those, over a third of them, I think it's about 3,500 right now, are what we call administrative detainees, including children. There are 350 children now amongst these detained, and I'm not sure of how many children, but probably a large majority of them actually that are administrative detainees, which means that they have never seen a trial, they don't know the charges against them, and they can be held really indefinitely like that. And Palestinians spend years of their lives like that. One of the most famous people right now detained and being tortured and has never been charged with anything, coming on over a year and a half, is Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya. Dr. Hussam was the director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza. Some of you may have seen that, the iconic photo of him walking towards a tank. He would not abandon his hospital and abandon his patients. And the Israelis took him. And since then, he has not been charged with anything, but he has been, for a long time, he was disappeared. We knew nothing about him. His lawyer only got to see him for the first time a few months ago, and again just a few weeks ago. And his lawyer came out with a stark statement, and that Dr. Hussam, first of all, had marks on his body that signified torture. And Dr. Hussam told his lawyer, "This is the last time you will see me. they brought me here to kill me. And there's been a worldwide campaign to try to get him released. Again, this doctor, this pediatrician, his crime was not abandoning his patients in a hospital that Israel was bombarding. And he has been held and tortured for over 18 months now with no charges, no trial. And he is only one of many, of dozens of medical workers and of hundreds, thousands actually right now of Palestinians. The 9,600 number that I gave you is what those we know. There are many Palestinians from Gaza who we don't know the fate of. Their families don't know. Are they dead, buried under the rubble? Has Israel captured them? We don't know. They have been forcibly disappeared. All of these are crimes. But quickly back to why they are more accurately, they should be described as hostages or those who have been forcibly disappeared. Because again, a prisoner implies that there was a process. There was an arrest based on evidence, a charge, a trial, a conviction. There is none of this for a large number of the Palestinians who are taken. And for those who there has been a conviction, again, this is usually they've taken a plea bargain because they are convicted in this system where there is 100% conviction rate because they have no chance. They have no chance. And what we see is large numbers of Palestinians who are taken in raids, large sweeps, even children who are taken in the middle of the night from their homes at gunpoint without the right to have a parent there or a lawyer there and are interrogated and abused and tortured. And again, not necessarily accused of anything. And Palestinians rounded up in large numbers in order to pressure the Palestinians, either the Palestinian resistance or Palestinian community at large, to act in a certain way according to what Israel wants. That in and of itself defines hostage taking. When you take civilians, they aren't charged with anything, and you are holding them to pressure your adversary, to pressure someone to act in a certain way, that is hostage taking. And if you've monitored or looked at the when there has been like hostage exchanges, right? Israel would agree to release a certain number. Again, not because they've acquitted them or anything, but it is an exchange of hostages, really. And then they will release a number of Palestinians in exchange for, in the past, um, Israelis who were held hostage. And then what they do is they go and round up almost just as many new Palestinians to hold for this exact purpose, for this kind of pressure. Uh, so it is really more accurately to call these Palestinians hostages rather than prisoners. And then when you get to how they are treated, the conditions, that just compounds the argument. There's there's a couple of reports released over the last few months from Palestinian organization and from the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights, Francesca Albanese, that talks about the extent, the systemic torture, starvation, denial of medical care, and multiple forms of unspeakable physical and sexual abuse that takes place in a structured pattern. It's not isolated incidents, it's a structured pattern of abuse. This all falls into line why the argument we make is that you should, these Palestinians, they aren't charged with anything. They aren't accused. Many of them don't even know the charges against them. They're being rounded up. They are being tortured, abused, in order to pressure Palestinian society to really to succumb to Israeli dominance. So I'll end this part by saying, on top of all of this, recently on March 30th of this year of 2026, the Israeli Knesset, which is their parliament, it passed the death penalty law for Palestinians. Of course, they call it the death penalty for terrorists law. Um, it was championed by Israeli far-right minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who some of you may have seen was involved in torturing the flotilla activists. But this law mandates death by hanging as the default punishment for Palestinians in the West Bank who are convicted of what they call a deadly terrorist acts, who are convicted by this military court where there's no due process. And we should know that Israel defines all kinds of Palestinian attacks, even legitimate Palestinian resistance. Israel defines it as terrorism. So judges can opt for life imprisonment as opposed to the death penalty, but that's only under very special circumstances. So the death penalty is mandatory and must be carried out within 90 days of sentencing. And why we say it's a death penalty law for Palestinians is there are Israelis, of course, living in the West Bank, but the law in its language excludes Israelis from the application of this law because in the language it says it's only for those who intentionally cause the death of a person with the aim of denying the existence of the state of Israel. So that definition excludes Jewish terrorists, Jewish Israeli terrorists, especially the settlers who frequently attack and sometimes kill Palestinians. Of course, they're not subjected to this law because they can't say that they're doing it to deny the Jewishness of the state. And of course, they're also not tried in Israeli military courts because Israeli civilians are tried if they're ever tried. There is not that I know of a Israeli who has been actually convicted or has gotten a suitable punishment for killing Palestinians. But if they are tried, it would be in Israeli civilian courts. So now you have, on top of this torture and these hostages, now you have those that may be tried and convicted, subject to this death penalty, automatic death penalty. So I'll stop there. Sorry, that was a little long.
Very good, very good.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you right now.
It's a good question. And I don't know whether there's anybody who want to ask any questions to you before I go to the next topic. Anybody wants to ask questions? Anybody online who wants to ask questions? 1, 2, 3. No? Okay. As an international lawyer, can you enlighten us on the international human law regarding the land grabbing in Palestine, especially in Gaza and West Bank? And Amnesty International just released a report on Israel ethnic cleansing of West Bank Bedouin communities. Your comment, please, and how we can mobilize international sanctions.
Yeah. So I'm going to start this by just setting out a couple of legal frameworks because there are a couple of legal frameworks that work together here without getting too much into the law. There is two distinct bodies of law here. There's international human rights law, and this protects the rights of freedoms of every person at all times in peace and during armed conflict. Although the law acknowledges that in limited like in emergency situations, some rights might be limited. For example, freedom of movement is a human right, but during armed conflict, that could be limited without necessarily violating the law. But certain rights, like the right to life, the right to be free of torture, these are non-derogable and they cannot be suspended under any circumstances. So sources of human rights law, we look at the
Can
universal.
you speak nearer to your mic because we can't really hear.
Oh, yes. Is this better?
Bit better. Yes.
Is better? Okay, so sources of human rights law, we look at, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is not a binding treaty, but it's widely regarded as reflecting customary international law. And then there are binding treaties. You have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. You have the Convention Against Torture, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. These are all sources of international human rights law. Then you have international humanitarian law. IHL applies specifically during armed conflict, and it includes the law of occupation, which it regulates the conduct and the responsibilities of an occupying power towards the occupied population and its territory. So the primary source of this, which we all know, is the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949, and there are additional protocols of 1977. During military occupations, of course, and the occupied Palestinian territory, which is the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, uh, international humanitarian law and international human rights law apply together. Okay, so these two bodies of law protect civilians and are supposed to regulate state conduct. Now, Israel rejects the position that it occupies the West Bank and Gaza. And the briefly why it does that is it has a stupid argument that says, when they took over the territory in 1967, it was not captured from a rightful sovereign, and therefore it's not occupied, it's just disputed. Most of the rest of the world, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the International Court of Justice, and almost all states reject Israel's position. This is occupied territory. Gaza is a little bit separate, and I'll explain that. But as when we look at the West Bank and the core prohibition, the Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 49, it prohibits an occupying power from transferring its own civilian populations into the territory it occupies. This is why all of the Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem are illegal under international law. And this is a position held by the UN, again, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the International Court of Justice has spoken on it, and the overwhelming majority of states. Under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, this kind of transfer of population, so settlements, is a war crime, And yet Israel now has nearly 200 settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory and recently announced new expansion of settlements, and Israel is not being held accountable. The International Court of Justice, which is the UN, the highest court of the UN, the World Court we call it, has weighed in twice on this issue. In 2004, there's the wall issue on the legality of Israel's wall in the occupied territories. And then most recently, just 2 years ago, in July of 2024, it released a comprehensive opinion. Now, some people who want to disregard this opinion will tell you it's an advisory opinion, it's not binding. It's actually the opposite, right? It's advisory because it did not come as a result of a contentious case. So it's not one state taking another state to the court. It came as a result of the UN asking the court to tell it what the law says as far as Israel's actions are concerned, because occupation in and of itself is not illegal. It's actually conceived of, this is why we have the law of occupation, because when there's armed conflict, after the conflict ends, usually there's a temporary occupation until the land is turned back over to its rightful sovereign. When Israel occupied in 1967, it never intended to give the land back. And so all of these years, we've never really, the occupation in and of itself hasn't been illegal. But the question that the UN asked the court is, what now, after all of these decades of Israel occupation and Israel's policies on the ground of confiscating land, annexing land, and building settlements and confiscating resources? And what is the result of that? And what the court said is really important. Even though it's an advisory opinion, it tells the world this is what international law says. And what it said is that Israel has created an unlawful situation in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. It is unlawful and it must end immediately, right? And Palestinians are owed reparations for all of the land stolen from them, and settlements must be dismantled. And every state that is a party to this international system of the UN has an obligation not to recognize the illegal situation that Israel has created. Therefore, we're not supposed to recognize our country's, Israel's control over Jerusalem, over the West Bank, and over Gaza, and now Gaza, which is under siege. I'll talk about that in a minute. Certainly not supposed to do any kind of business, support Israel's military, or trade with West Bank settlements, all of that. And more than that, all of these states and international institutions also have a responsibility to do whatever they can, use their leverage to pressure Israel to end its unlawful situation as quickly as possible. So that is really a command from the court that our countries are supposed to be sanctioning Israel or using whatever leverage they have to push Israel to abide by international law and end this unlawful situation. And one last thing I'll say about what the court said, which is really important, because in the world of diplomacy, we always hear negotiations, and there's the Oslo peace process, and Palestinians have to negotiate for their freedom. What the court said was that Israel is violating Palestinian right to self-determination that they are entitled to now, not tomorrow, not the result of negotiations. This Palestinian are entitled to self-determination now, and it's not beholden to any kind of conditions that Israel wants to put on it. Israel has no right to put conditions on Palestinians' right to self-determination. And yet, essentially, when countries tell us that Palestinians have to negotiate, and the Trump peace plan, which creates all these hurdles for Palestinians before you can even talk about Palestinian freedom, that is total violation of the law. And so Israel has been conducting these land grabs in total violation of the law, and they do it in different ways. I don't know if we have time to go into them, but essentially, one of the most sinister ways is they use these old Ottoman or British mandate laws. One of them, which says, for example, and I've seen this a lot with some of my Palestinian farmer friends, they will say that land that has been uncultivated, not cultivated for a period of time, usually like 3 years, will revert to state land. It'll be like state land under state control. Palestinians, of course, want to cultivate their land, but what Israel does, it's built a wall with fences and gates, and that it does not allow Palestinians to reach their land because now there's a wall there or gates and that don't open. And so when Palestinians can't reach, they can't go there, or there are settlers that will attack them if they go there, then the Israeli state will come and say, oh, well, you have not cultivated your land. This is state land now. This is one of the ways that Israel has taken over a lot of land, and they'll tell you it's lawful, right? And then they'll use them to expand settlements. If there are questions, I can go into this more, but on Gaza, of course, is the same occupied territory, but Israel tried to tell the world in 2005 it did what it's called a unilateral disengagement, and it pulled out its military from the center of Gaza, and it said, and it dismantled its settlements. There were settlements in Gaza. Israel dismantled them, pulled out its military, and said, there you go, we're no longer occupied Gaza. But this is very far from the truth, because what it did is it completely surrounded, of course, Gaza. And it locked the people in. So even though its military was not in the center of Gaza and it took away its settlements, it prevented Palestinians from moving, from engaging in its own commerce, in being able to leave their territory. And Israel continued to control Gaza by air, sea, and land. Palestinians can't have an airport. They don't control their airways. They can't have their own, even their own cell phone companies have to go through Israel. They can't, their waters are controlled by Israel. And not, anyone going in and out of Gaza is controlled by Israel. They have to get special permission, even the United Nations. And so when Israel pulled out saying, okay, Gaza is free, go establish your Riviera or your new, Switzerland or, of the Middle East, this is far from the truth because under the law, Israel maintained what is called effective control. When a state has effective control of a territory, it doesn't matter if they don't have soldiers there. They effectively control it. And Israel controlled what Palestinians in Gaza were eating for dinner based on what UN trucks they were allowing into Gaza on that particular day. And they would certainly restrict what was coming in and out. And then in 2006, after Palestinian elections, they tightened their control. So they banned a lot of things from getting into Gaza. This is what started this comprehensive siege and blockade that we have been trying to break, that was put on in order to punish the Palestinian civilian population. And it's not only about what food was allowed in, but what Palestinians would be allowed out to get treatment that wasn't available in Gaza because Israel would not allow certain medicines or certain equipment in. So as of 2007, or when we first reached Gaza by boat in 2008, you had hundreds of Palestinians who had been killed because they could not get the treatment they needed because of Israel's blockade. And that has been in place now. Israel has controlled Gaza since 1967, but this punishing blockade since 2006 that has been used in the last 3 years as also a tool of Israel's genocide, engineering a starvation campaign that the world witnessed with their own eyes. That now, under the guise of, we have this fake ceasefire that's been in place since October 10. Dr. Fauziah and I were actually in Israeli captivity when that Israel had just captured our boat when that ceasefire agreement went into place. But since that ceasefire went into place, Israel has killed over 1,000 Palestinians, nearly 300 of them children. Just today, they burned another family alive. They are every day attacking Palestinians, and yet we still say there is this so-called ceasefire. And under the ceasefire agreement, they were supposed to increase the amount of aid being allowed into Gaza, which they have not done. They increased it a little bit, but one of the things that they were doing before October 7, 2023, Gaza needed about 400 to 500 trucks a day of aid just to of aid and commercial products just to fulfill the needs of society. Now imagine the need after all of this destruction of people's homes and livelihood and jobs and everything destroyed. They need bare minimum 600 trucks to keep people alive. Israel was supposed to guarantee 600 trucks entering Gaza every day under this ceasefire agreement, but not for one day have they done that. On average, about 100, 120, 150 trucks have been allowed to enter. And what they've been doing is actually not allowing a lot of the humanitarian aid trucks in. They'll let in more commercial trucks. So you might see in the markets more products available. But Gaza has turned really into a black market. You let these commercial trucks in when people don't have money to buy, but the aid that is coming in to be distributed to the people who need it, those can't come in. And so the humanitarian catastrophe persists on top of the daily killing, on top of Israel taking more and more land. Now it occupies about 70% of Gaza and has declared its intention to continue to occupy land and put Palestinians in literally they're building concentration camps. So the sinister plot that is happening here and the fact that we are watching this, we know how it ends. I mean, history tells us how it ends when people do nothing, when states do nothing, and yet our governments aren't doing anything. They have gone along with the Trump's peace plan and Board of Peace, which is intended to replace the United Nations. And it violates actually core tenets of international law. Uh, and, and yet that is what we have. So I think your question is like, what do we do? What can we do as civilians? And that's probably one of the most important questions we can pose here. But before I go into that, let me pause to see if there are any questions.
There are a few questions. One is from Khalid Jimat. Does the law affect the current hostages or only for the future cases? I think this is regarding to the killing, the Knesset ruling of killing. Yeah.
Yes, it's not retroactive. You heard some rumors that it's supposed to apply to like it will apply to Marwan Barghouti and some high-profile prisoners, but no, it is not retroactive. It is intended to take effect 30 days after the passage of the law, of course, which already passed, but it is being challenged. Now, when it's challenged, one of the organizations that is challenging it has said that it expects that it will not be carried out during this period that it's being challenged, but that's not really a guarantee. So it's not retroactive, but for future cases.
Mas, do you still have faith in international human rights and humanitarian laws after almost 3 years of Israel and its funders and endeavors continuously blocking?
That is a good question that I'm asked, all of the time. And it's not really just in the past 2.5, 3 years that I've been skeptical about international law. I have, since I started studying the law, I have understood that the law is not going to save us. I taught at Al-Quds University. I taught Palestinian students. And even back then, this was in 2008, they kind of asked me, they're like, what good is this? Because it doesn't apply to us. And so the question is, you have these laws that look good on paper, but the implementation is something else, right? There is no international kind of police force that will enforce these laws. The enforcement comes down to states, what states will do. And that comes down to political will, right? We see it even playing out. For example, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Bibi Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, and yet they have been able to fly over certain airspace of member countries of the ICC that have an obligation to arrest them. They have visited some states that should have arrested them, and they have not. And of course, now you have the United States that is threatening to dismantle the ICC brick by brick. So you have these laws, but implementation comes down to what the states will do. And so far, we have seen that they let Israel get away with so much. Israel is kind of the exception. And not only Israel, of course, other countries, most notorious, look at what the United States is doing, what it's been doing in the Caribbean, what it did in Venezuela. So the law has kind of been abused and used to the advantage of these hegemonic, imperial, colonial states. But does that mean that, forget international law? I would say no. Um, the law was put in place by these countries, but the development of the law over the years, especially during the period of decolonization, when a lot of previously colonized states got their independence and started participating as nations, you had a lot of good law developed. Again, it didn't always work as it should, usually used kind of against the weaker states and in service of the stronger states. But the argument is we should work to make it stronger. We should work to strengthen it, not dismantle it. And what Israel and the United States are trying to do now is totally dismantle it by showing that law doesn't matter. They can do whatever they want. Its might is right. And that is a world in which nobody is safe. Nobody is safe. So my argument would be we use the law as a tool. How does civil society, we look to these laws and what they stand for, who they are supposed to protect, use it to mobilize our communities, our unions, our organizations to take effective action, to pressure our governments to do what is right.
Okay, thank you. There is one more thing that you wanted to explain to us. It wasn't what
Um,
it.
oh, I just wanted to go a little bit if you wanted to talk a bit. I mean, I know are most of the listeners here from Malaysia? Because I know obviously, Mike here and others are doing such incredible work, and the country of Malaysia, I don't know if there are other countries listening in, but it already has a very strong position, on Israel, on not normalizing relations, which is exactly what we want to push other states to do, to sanction Israel, to cut off relations with Israel. But there are other actions. If you are from Malaysia, if there are other countries, we can talk about some specific actions. But what we are as civil society pushing for is to isolate Israel, right? To boycott, to sanction, to divest from companies doing business also with the Israeli kind of apartheid genocidal state. And while, again, Malaysia doesn't have formal relations, I think that you can, as Malaysian civil society, play a really important role in pushing other companies with Israeli ties to to cut these ties, right? So economic pressure on companies, and a lot of them are US companies, but also international companies that do business with Israel and that profit from Israel's occupation, apartheid, land theft, genocide. If more people in civil society will start putting pressure on them to boycott them, then they will have a choice to make. Do I continue to support this genocidal state, or do I have, relations and do business with the rest of the world? So we want to create that, increase the pressure on Israel, of course, and sanction and turn it into a pariah state, but also all of these companies that are enabling Israel, and these are mainly international companies, that we as global civil society and consumers, the tech consumers and other kind of international chains, can also send a message that we are not going to consume or do business with you as long as you keep supporting Israel. Um, of course, a lot of people have been, and I know Mike here has done such important work in the Palestinian civil society and in Gaza, so supporting these organizations that maintain these ties with Palestinians who, part of what Israel is doing is trying to um, cut off all Palestinian hope, right? That they're isolated, the law doesn't apply to them, nobody cares about them. But when international civil society take action, that's really inspiring and create opportunities to connect, opportunities to maybe even possibly come to the country. Of course, we want Palestinians to stay in Palestine, but a lot of Palestinians do look for opportunities to study abroad, to learn, to train abroad. And when we have these close people to people ties, that can be very, very helpful. Last thing I meant to say earlier, and I think it's important to say, all of the things that we talked about here, the land grabs, the discrimination against Palestinian citizens of Israel, of course, the land theft, the resource theft, the the hostages, the genocide in Gaza. This is all part of, not a war, not Israel defending itself as we know. This is a part of a decades long settler colonial project. And it's really important for people to understand it as that, because when you understand that settler colonialism is succeeds when it replaces the indigenous population, then you'll understand that Israel's policy and directive and goal was always to get rid of the Palestinians. And for those Palestinians it couldn't get rid of, it didn't, then to keep them subjugated, to maintain domination over. So this is why you have that apartheid system. This is why Israel never intended and will never agree to any kind of equal justice, equal rights with Palestinians. I was just listening to a dialogue taking place before this, which was infuriating because they're talking about peace and saying that Hamas is the problem. People fighting for their freedom, you might not agree to the mechanisms that they use to fight, but that is not the problem. The problem is the colonial oppressive system that wants to keep them subjugated. And our role is to, you know, fight for the implementation of the law by pressuring our governments and by using our economic power to not support companies that profit from the crimes that Israel is committing. And of course, lastly, to join, you can always support what we have been doing with the Freedom Flotilla. We have been engaged in nonviolent direct action, meaning, you know, Israel's closure of Gaza is, and this comprehensive siege is unlawful. The world knows it's unlawful, but yet we have not been doing anything about it in terms of, you have a situation where Israel is accused of committing genocide. All the major human rights organizations have concluded Israel is committing genocide, and there's a case before the International Court of Justice. And yet, the world still allows Israel to control what is allowed to get into the people that it is genociding, that it is actively exterminating. How is that okay in any kind of civilized world? How is it okay that a country committing genocide gets to decide if any aid is going to reach the people that it is exterminating? And yet that's what we have. When our countries are waiting, sending aid that has to get Israeli permission to get in, we are perpetuating that system, allowing Israel to maintain control. And this is why we have pushed for these boats and these flotillas, because our message is no, Israel has no right to control Gaza. And you, our government, each one should not be letting Israel do this. You want to deliver aid to Gaza? And by the way, Gaza wants freedom, not aid. But of course they need aid because Israel has deliberately created this situation. But you don't wait for Israel to give you permission. You put your aid on boats and come with us, or you go, send an armada, get in. Stop letting Israel do this. And we will keep pushing to do that, because as long as we give in to, Israel's diktats and what it's doing, we will never have a situation where there's any kind of peace. And we will continue to see what we're seeing now, what we've been seeing for the last 3 years, and even worse.
There are two questions still. Are you okay to go? You're almost midnight, right, over there?
Yeah, but it's okay.
Okay. Malaysia does not have a diplomatic relation with Israel and bars passport holders entering Israel. Recently, our Prime Minister stressed that any Israeli found in Malaysia must be deported. So a few US lawmakers claim that Malaysia is anti-Semitic and ask US to retaliate and stop and assistance business ties. Do you think this is significant?
So I didn't hear the last part. Who is that? The business ties. I heard the part about anti-Semitic and Malaysia being anti-Semitic, which is far from the truth. And we definitely need to distinguish, and I think we do distinguish between Jews. Malaysia didn't say Jews aren't allowed, right? So, and if an American Jew or a European Jew or someone wants to come in, they can come in. It is Israelis on an Israeli passport, and it's perfectly legitimate to ban a certain country from coming in. You're cutting off all diplomatic relations with a certain country because it is committing genocide. It is perfectly legal and normal to ban all those passport holders from coming. And I am encouraging more actions like this. Israel needs to be banned from international participating in international sports, needs to be banned from international forums and thought gatherings or any kind of international gatherings. Israel needs to be isolated because, of course, we want to cut off the economic lifelines, all of the companies that are sustaining Israel, the military aid. But we also need Israeli civil society to feel the pressure so they will force their governments, because right now, sad to say, the overwhelming majority of Israeli Jews support what their government is doing. Over 90%, I think the last time, if I'm not mistaken, 92% maybe of Israeli Jews support Israel's actions in Gaza. So basically support a genocide. They could care less and want some government to do more because it doesn't bother them, right? So they need to start feeling that they are isolated. They cannot participate in international civil society. They are not welcome anywhere until they rise up against their government and this policy. So that is perfectly legitimate. And I think anyone that wants to say that these kinds of policies are anti-Semitic they are deliberately conflating Judaism with the actions of a state. And that is anti-Semitic because not all Jews support the actions of the Israeli state. And to suggest that they should or they do or the action of the state represents Jews is anti-Semitic in and of itself. So those attacks are going to come because these people, Zionists, don't have anything else to argue. And we see them in the United States. They throw these attacks all the time, especially against politicians. And we're fighting back. And this issue has become a big, big part of a lot of our elections here. I'm speaking to you from Michigan, and we have a big election coming up in just a couple of weeks, where this is a big issue. For one seat, one of our candidates is heavily supported by the Israel lobby, is spending nearly $60 million on her campaign, the pro-Israel lobby. And we have another candidate who says cut off all aid to Israel and has massive support from the ground, has massive people support. But again, they are investing $60 million to try to beat him. And we'll see what happens who are going to win, the people or the money. But this issue is becoming big, and we are absolutely rejecting any contention that criticism of Israeli policy or sanctions on Israel is anti-Semitic. But I didn't get the last part of your question.
There's another two questions. I will go to this first because it's related to what you said just now. The support for Israel in the US has decreased substantially since the genocide in Gaza. How long do you think before it will be translated into policies like ending military aid to Israel?
I think it's hard to predict, but I think it's not far off. Just last week, we had a vote that was very surprising. Basically, it was a vote on a military the military budget, but the one congressman had an amendment that would block Israeli weapon sales to Israel, U.S. weapon sales to Israel. Now, traditionally, we might have had a dozen of people support this. And even the congressman himself thought maybe if he got 2 dozen, maybe if he got 20, 25 people supporting him in Congress, that would be good. You had 104 support him, all Democrats. He was Republican or independent, but then the rest were Democrats. So the shift is largely in the Democratic Party, but also there are some clear breaks with some very influential Republicans also breaking with Israel. And so to see this big shift where you have 103 plus the Republican Democrats voting to block aid, military aid to Israel is really unheard of. And I expect it only to increase because the polls in the United States are showing about 80% of Democrats oppose this relationship with Israel, oppose supporting Israel. And again, you have other breaks with very influential Republicans who I think will start also influencing the Republican voters and electorate. Unfortunately, you still have Donald Trump in power. I don't know what Epstein files or whatever, what they have on him. He knows the tide is turning, but he is still staunchly pro-Israel. So I think if we look at the elections coming up in November, I think the Democrats will win a majority of the House and Senate, which will move us towards more change. And then if the Democrats take the White House in 2028, I think we'll start to see some big changes there because what people have seen and the shift, there's no going back from that. I think it will just continue to increase this absolute revulsion when it comes to Israel, this recognition that Israel, our relationship has harmed us, has dragged us into wars, is eating up billions of our dollars that should stay here at home, and that has been used to commit a genocide. So I can't tell you exactly, but there has been massive shifts. And so I expect bigger changes to come in the next few years. Of course, I don't know. We don't Palestinians have that long. Yes, inshallah.
It's the ICC member states voting on the sexual harassment case against Karim Khan a procedural anomaly. As much as I want justice for survivors of sexual harassment, I can't help thinking it's part of the ways with which Israel and US non-ICC members are using to undermine the ICC.
Yeah, I agree absolutely with you. It has been very disturbing. I agree with you. There should be justice for victims of abuse, and there should be a fair and neutral process. And the ICC has kind of tainted that, and they've politicized the process. So you have a vote that I think takes place tomorrow or the next day, but it's a political vote. So what's happening for those who don't know, there's been a long investigation. The ICC, the Assembly of States, they appointed a judicial panel to review the evidence and to come up with a conclusion as to what happened and if there is evidence to meet the threshold of guilt in what the prosecutor Karim Khan is accused of. And the judicial panel unanimously concluded that there is not sufficient evidence. But a political body, is saying we're not going to take your recommendation and conclusion, and we are going to vote, have a vote that disregards what this judicial body came up with. And on top of that, there's other procedural problems in that they've kind of changed the rules halfway through in terms of how the voting is to be done and how many votes are needed in order to remove or replace him. And you can never, in any kind of fair process, change the rules halfway through. And so there should have been a non-politicized process to get true justice. But it's been so politicized that I think it has really harmed the reputation of the court at the very moment that the court is under and has been under attack by the Trump administration for sure, and is facing other difficulties. It is the moment where it should have been more meticulous about how it was doing this. And of course, there are a lot of speculation that it is the United States and Israel that are pulling strings of some states to behave in this way. And it is very, very unfortunate. It is the only international criminal court that we have. It was founded to, again, prosecute the most horrific war criminals. And it has been letting the most horrific war criminals get away and instead working against itself. So that is unfortunate.
There's no more question. Thank you so much, Huwaida. Well worth spending 1 hour with full of information We actually wish that we can go on more, but because of the time constraint and also you have to go to bed to get your rest. And Adi Kezek is here and Moshan is here too in the room, listening to your explanation. Thank you so much, and
Wonderful. Well,
see you
my
soon.
love to you all.
Bye
Thank you
bye.
so
Thank
much
you.
for having me and for all you do. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.